Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome back to my channel, My Loverlies. If you've never been here before, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I am so happy you found me. I do so hope that you will like and subscribe before you leave. Become part of the Mama family. Mama's got your back, at least where makeup's concerned, and definitely when that makeup is cheap. Today is True Love Tuesday, and we are talking about Mr. Richard Gere, American gentleman or gigolo. We shall see. Before we get started, a very special, very warm welcome to any of those that are new to my channel. I am so incredibly happy that you are here. If you enjoy the content, I do so hope that you will mash that thumbs up button. I hope that you will subscribe if you have not already. And I hope that you will ring my bell, turn on your notifications, so that way, next time I upload a video, you can come right back here and we can hang out together again. My makeup is already done. Well, my eye makeup anyway. I used the new release from Cosmic Brushes. This is the Nude Trolls palette, and oh my good gravy, such a beauty. We will talk a little bit more about this next week for New Makeup Monday. Such a good one though. Guys, I will make sure to have everything I used in today's video in the description box below, along with the tags to all of my other socials, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. I did make sure to film a TikTok on today's eye look. Guys, if you are not following me on all my other socials, you definitely should go do that. I post fun content every single day, and if you're following me everywhere, you don't have to worry about missing a single moment of it. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's dive into the love story. Richard Gere, what can I say, mamas? He has been just about everybody I know's crush for the longest time. He has been a staple in Hollywood for, I want to say, at least the last 50 years. He's been a knight in shining armor. He's been, a super hardened off kind of cop. He's been everything. His range is kind of fantastic. But for the most part, he is known as being that kind of knight in shining armor, the kind of guy that comes in and sweeps the princess off her feet. He is very much a romance guy, and the minute we all see him, we kind of swoon just a little bit. His love story is, it's prolific. And I say love story, but it is many, many love stories compiled into one lifetime. This man has definitely been around the block once or twice. He has been there and he has done that. He was especially when he was younger, such an incredibly beautiful man. Y'all, every time I watch American Gigolo, I literally lose my mind. He was so incredibly beautiful. And that hair, even before it turned silver, was just, so fluffy and delightful. And really, it just makes you want to think about running your fingers through it. He is, and still is to this day, a very attractive man, and his track record definitely proves that he had no problem with the ladies at all whatsoever. We're going to dive in from, of course, from very early childhood all the way up unto the current marriage that he's in right now. He has done so much. His life has been far from boring, and I guarantee that today's video is going to be both enlightening and totally interesting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to dig up a bunch of stuff, especially from his childhood and his early years. I checked out his Wikipedia page. I checked out any biographies that might be out there. And honestly, he's such a personal and private person. There just isn't a ton of literature out there on him at all. I was able to dig up just a little bit of info though, so I will share with you what I found. As always, I'm going to start at the very beginning. We're going to talk about his early life and his career, and then we will get into the juicy stuff and all of the relationships. He was born Richard Tiffany Gere on August 31st, 1949. He is now 74 years old. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to homemaker mother Doris Ann, and his father, who was an insurance salesman, was named Homer George Gere. Fun fact, actually, both of his parents can trace their ancestry all the way back to the frickin' Mayflower. Guys, he's literally descended from pilgrims. And not only that, he can also trace his lineage back, his relationship, his family tree, back to Princess Diana. Like, he is very distantly related to Princess Diana. On top of that, he's been related to quite a few US presidents. Richard is the second oldest of 5 children, so he has 4 brothers and sisters. His parents were dedicated Methodists, so he was raised in that faith. However, Richard is a avid Buddhist and has been studying Buddhism for a very, very long time. When Richard was still in primary school, his parents packed up the family and moved to Syracuse, New York. Syracuse is where he did most of his schooling. He attended both middle and high school in Syracuse, and in middle school, this is where he joined the school band and took up the trumpet. Now, Richard was an incredibly gifted child. He was gifted pretty much in every sense, beautiful, musically inclined, also very physical. Now, when it came to music, that's where his heart really, really was. And when he picked up the trumpet, it was like his fingers were made for it, and he was just so good at it. Trumpet was, again, it was his first love. He continues to play the trumpet to this day. Now, when it came to high school, this is where Richard really got into gymnastics. Gymnastics it just came easily for him. He is such a physical man, very at home in his own body, at home with how it works, things like that. So gymnastics was really the thing that kind of took off for him. And also gymnastics is what allowed him to go to college. We'll get into that in just a little bit though. So Richard pursued both band and gymnastics the entire way through school until he graduated from North Syracuse Central High School in 1967. Surprisingly, I didn't find anything about Richard being in any drama clubs or theater, anything like that, while he was in high school. It really was just band and gymnastics. Now, like I said, gymnastics is what allowed him to go to college, and through gymnastics, he ended up getting a full ride scholarship to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Now, he ended up attending university, but music was really where his heart was, and while he was at college, he really had to focus on the gymnastics aspect. So 2 years after, arriving at college, he was like, I'm done, and he left. He dropped out in order to pursue a musical career as a trumpeter. After leaving college, he performed in several programs throughout New England, where he eventually branched out into acting. Now, he became the understudy in a production of Grease on Broadway in 1972. 5 years later, he landed his first film role alongside Diane Keaton in 1977 in the feature film Looking for Mr. Goodbar. Another 3 years after that, he landed his breakout role as the lead in American Gigolo. Y'all, the first time I saw that man in American Gigolo, I like to thought that my heart was going to beat out of my chest. He was so incredibly beautiful, and that movie was kind of fantastic. There was something about him in that role that was so physical, but also, I don't know, it was just fantastic. And then even to just look at him just kind of made you want to melt a little bit. He was delightful. That movie pretty much cemented his status as a sex symbol, and that would continue throughout the duration of his career. Like I said, he has since gone on to become a truly memorable staple in Hollywood. He's got a pretty impressive range. He's been in a bunch of romances, from Pretty Woman to Runaway Bride. He's been in a couple of super suspense-filled dramatic roles, talking about Unfaithful and Primal Fear. He's been there, he's done it all. He's even been in a couple of musicals, namely Chicago, which is one of my favorite musicals of all time. He is truly delightful. He's gone on to make an incredible career for himself. He's got a net worth of about $120 million. He's got at least 57 leading roles under his belt, and for 50 years, he pretty much took Hollywood by storm. On top of his acting work, he was also the first man to appear on the cover of Vogue magazine, as well as being named People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive in 1999. Now, not only is he a beautiful person on the outside, he's also pretty dedicated to giving back on the inside. So he advocates for better human rights in Tibet, as well as contributing to campaigns for AIDS awareness and also ecological issues. And now on to the juicy bits. I was able to dig up around 20 to 21 different relationships that this man has been in throughout his time in Hollywood. Like I said, American Gentleman or Gigolo, y'all, he kind of got around just a little bit. But to his defense, I will say that it was the 60s and the 70s, even the 80s. Free love was a thing, and he was a beautiful man. He was a beautiful person surrounded by beautiful people, and he just did what everybody else did. Affair number one. Now, how did Richard's romantic Hollywood escapades really begin? Well, it all started with Hollywood designer Lori Rodkin. Now, she was arguably just as famous for her affairs as she was her designs. She was very loud and very proud about the fact that she was in charge of her romantic destiny and let the world know about it. They had an affair sometime in the very early 70s, and again, I wasn't able to find a ton of information on it. I just know that it did happen, on top of the fact that she's an incredibly interesting person just in her own right. She's been lifelong friends with both Cher and Elton John. Can you imagine those dinner parties? I would just love to be a fly on the wall for one of them. Anyway, they had a wild ride together. They were together for, I want to say, just a couple of months, and then they kind of split apart and did their own thing. Hookup number 2 was with a woman named Carol Mallory. Now, she was just as wild, if not even more so. They first met in 1969. They stayed together maybe 1969, 1970. They took acting classes together before either of them had ever made it big back in New York. They reconnected a few years later after Richard had done American Gigolo, I think, and they began a very hot and very heavy affair that lasted on and off for a few years. Now, Carol would go on to talk about many of her escapades while she was in and amongst the Hollywood glitterati. And there's a comment that she said about Richard that just kind of like, it made my heart flutter just a little bit. She said, his gymnastic skills were apparent. He did things his way and he didn't hold back. He was Valentino in the flesh and a sex symbol not to be forgotten, not to be lumped in with all the others, but to be remembered for his uniqueness, for his thoughtfulness and his caring. Now that paints quite a delightful picture, does it not? Now during this time, Richard really didn't have a ton of actual relationships. It was very much a series of hookups, flings, and one-night stands. The next relationship that he was in was he briefly dated actress and model Barbara Carrera. They dated for a few months in 1970. She too had nothing but nice things to say about Mr. Gere. She said, Richard was a beautiful person who was also into metaphysical Buddhist things. He was the only one who encouraged me to mend my relationship with my father. So I think for Richard, as much as it was about just enjoying the moment, I think he also wanted to leave each one of his flings and relationships just a little bit better off than when he entered them. Now, Penelope Milford was Richard's first serious-ish kind of relationship. They met while working in an off-Broadway play / musical together entitled A Long Time Coming and A Long Time Gone. So that happened in 1971, and they actually dated as in were boyfriend-girlfriend for quite a while. They dated from 1971 to 1978, which is quite a long while. Though I'm not sure if it was a super casual thing, kind of like on again, off again, or if they were in a committed, monogamous, serious kind of relationship. Dawn Steele was the next woman in his line of conquests, yet she was another fling Richard had in the 70s, though I'm not sure if the motive for their relationship was personal or professional. And the reason I say this is because Dawn was a very high-powered movie executive. She actually became a pretty big name when it came to movie production. So they were together. They met when Dawn had just moved to LA, and they were still struggling, trying to figure things out. But as Dawn's career progressed, she was able to help Richard in a very real way. She was the one who helped offer him roles, movie roles, things like that. So I think it might have started off as something very personal, but kind of grown into more of a professional relationship, though they did continue to date and hook up on and off throughout the years. Now, unfortunately, Dawn passed away in 1997, but they stayed friendly up until the day of her passing. Apparently, Richard Gere and Diana Ross were a thing. It's rumored that Richard and Diana had a multiple night stand after they met at Studio 54 and danced the night away. Now, this happened in 1979, though of course it was never confirmed. They were never really photographed together besides dancing at Studio 54. But every time they kind of crossed paths after that, be it at an award show, a red carpet, someplace like that. They always exchanged this kind of knowing glance and this soft smile to each other. They also made sure to hug at every opportunity. So I'm thinking that maybe there was a little something there. They just decided to keep it to themselves. After Diana, Richard's next fling was with another designer, this time a designer we are all very well aware of, Diane von Furstenberg. Now, it wasn't so much a fling as it was a one-night stand, and honestly, nobody even knew about it until just a couple of years ago when Diane kind of like came out of the closet about it and admitted to it while she was doing an interview for, I'm not sure which show, I don't remember, but she pretty much admitted it. She said that it was definitely a whole lot of fun, and it definitely happened. Her exact words were that they spent one night together in the 80s, and Diane said it was both wild and passionate, and that it was a night that she will never forget. Now, it seems to me that Mr. Gere knew exactly what he was doing. It also seems that he left women just as happy, if not happier, than they were when he met them, right? So there is no animosity here. It doesn't seem to me like he's like this big jerk who was a womanizer and just used women. I just think that he was very open about the fact that he was willing to throw it down, and if she was up for it, so was he. And I feel like he was just down for a good time. And quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, especially when you consider the time in which all of this is happening. Now, the next woman he had a relationship with was the one that arguably I'm the most interested in. He then had a very brief romance with a woman by the name of Tina Chow. Now, Tina Chow, her life, like the more I looked into her, she was a truly incredible woman. She was a Japanese, German, kind of like half-breed, which is what she called herself. But she just said she had a hard time trying to figure out which world she fit into. Did she fit into the German world, or did she fit into the Japanese world? Well, she actually ended up being discovered by one of my very favorite skincare brands of all time, Shiseido, and she became the face of that brand for a very, very long time. After being discovered by Shiseido, she met and then married her husband, Michael Chow, and it just seems like her life with her husband was a lot of her doing what she thought she was supposed to do, and not really a lot of what she wanted to do. And it seems like her life was just a lot of sacrifice. So when she met Richard, she was on the verge of divorcing her husband. She was still married. So her and Richard did have an affair. But when they met, Richard just opened the door for her. He opened the door for so many possibilities. He offered her a good time with no strings. Richard didn't want anything from her, but to just have fun with her. And I think that really opened her eyes in a very, very big way. On top of that, Richard also introduced her to Buddhism. He introduced her to holistic healing and meditation methods, things like that. After her affair with Richard and her divorce from her husband, Michael Chow, she then entered into a second affair with a very prominent French aristocrat. I can't say his name, I can't pronounce it, so I won't even try. I will say, though, that through her relationship with him, she contracted AIDS, and it very sadly took her life 3 years later. She ended up passing away in January of 1992, I believe. Now, up to this point, Richard has not had a super intense, very personal, long-term relationship. He's had a couple of relationships that have lasted a few years, have been kind of casual, on and off again. However, he's not really brought anybody home to meet mama yet. And now we're getting to that point. Cut to 1978, and this is when he meets Brazilian painter Sylvia Martins. They dated very seriously for almost 8 years. They even traveled to Nepal together. They met the Tibetan monks. At this point, this is when Richard met the Dalai Lama, struck up his friendship with him. Richard has been very good friends with the Dalai Lama for going on 30 years at this point. He is truly a very dedicated Buddhist and pretty much thinks that the Dalai Lama, like the sun, rises and sets in his eyes. Speaking of the Dalai Lama, I feel like there was some controversy with this man not too long ago. If you guys remember what I'm talking about, please let me know, because I can't really say anything too much about it because I don't know what YouTube allows me to say or not. But I do remember some controversy. If I can find it, I'll pop a little blip of it up here on the screen. Other than that, Richard is a very staunch supporter of his, and he of course turned Sylvia Martins onto Buddhism. They were together for a very, very long time, had a very serious, committed relationship with each other. Unfortunately, it did not stand the test of time, and they eventually went their own separate ways. But yet again, he continues to stay friendly with her. It was a very amicable separation. There was no animosity there. They enjoyed their time together, and when it was over, they just kind of went and did their own thing. Now, fun fact about Sylvia, she actually went on and married very, very well. She went on to marry billionaire Konstantin Narachos in 1994, I believe 1997, I'm sorry. But yeah, she definitely married up. Now, I know for a fact that he dated for a very short time, about a year, Susan Sarandon. And when it comes to Miss Susan Sarandon, I adore her. She is quite possibly one of my favorite actresses of all time. I don't know what it is about her. I don't know if it is her I don't give a care attitude. I don't care if it's her sassiness. I don't know what it is about her, but I just think she is completely and totally fabulous. And because I kind of rediscovered her this week, we're going to talk about her and her marriage to Tim Robbins next week. So definitely stay tuned for that. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to dig up very much information about his relationship with Susan. I did find some really fun pictures, but other than that, there's nothing really out there to even say that they were really together, other than the fact that it's kind of like universally known that they were a couple for at least a little while. I'm thinking for about a year in 1982. Now, they did go out on a bunch of dates. They were photographed together a couple of times. They were together on a couple of red carpets, things like that. But like I said, Richard is such an intensely private person that he really just doesn't talk about his personal life at all. Around the same time that he was kind of having this dalliance with Susan, he was also said to be in a romance with Queen Babs. Like, the man has dated some of the most important, influential, and powerful women in the world. And you gotta say, the man has a seriously good picker, right? Because most of the women that he has dated have been so unique and so powerful in this uniquely feminine way. Like, they're just incredible women. He definitely associates himself with some absolute winners for sure. So he's having this affair with Barbra Streisand, and I adore Barbra Streisand. I think she's fantastic. I fell in love with her when I fell in love with The Nanny. The Nanny was absolutely obsessed with her. You guys remember I talked about Fran Drescher not too long ago. Absolutely adored Barbra Streisand, and through her, I really fell in love with her and her movies and her music. My grandmother had a couple of Barbra Streisand movies, one in particular where she becomes a boxing manager, like she becomes the owner of like this boxer kind of thing. She becomes his manager and like his ring. I don't know. It was a super cute movie. And then, of course, you have all of her musicals. I am so obsessed with classic movies, like Turner Classic Movies, things like that. One of my favorite things on the entire planet. I'm obsessed with old Hollywood, things like that. And Barbra Streisand, she is one of the characters that really is a part of old Hollywood, but was also very relevant in the new age as well. So she really transitioned very, very easily. So again, a really powerful, very magnetic, very interesting person. And they dated on and off for about 3 years. So it's basically said that they had an ongoing kind of like low-key hookup situation from 1980 to 1983. Now, the reason I say this is on and off, because the relationship he had with Susan occurs right smack dab in the middle of that time frame. So I'm assuming they met up when they had time. They met up when Barbara said, all right, come on, I'm ready for you, that kind of thing. And then when she was done with him, he kind of went on his own way. But of course, it's Babs, and you do exactly what Babs tells you to do. For me, somehow just knowing that Barbra Streisand was interested in him as a partner and as a companion just makes him that much more intriguing to me. Because, you know, Barbara, she don't mess with no scrubs, right? So Richard must have really had something very special to offer for him to like pique her interest. Now, while we're talking about rumors, I also read a rumor that Richard had a one-night stand with this Priscilla Presley. Now, again, this has not been substantiated. There is no evidence to corroborate this at all whatsoever. However, I did find it mentioned in a couple of different articles, so I figured I would tell you guys about it. Apparently, this happened in 1988. They met up, they had a one-night stand, and after that, they just kind of like never met up again. But apparently, according to Priscilla, it did happen, and it was divine. The next name that pops up in Richard's little black book is the seriously stunning Miss Kim Basinger. Now, this was real. This was corroborated. This is substantiated. So we know that for a fact that this actually happened, and it caused a boatload of drama back in the day. From what I could gather back in the day, Kim was married to her first husband, Ron Snyder Britton, and they had been married for more than 6 years at this point. Now, somehow, Kim and Richard, they connect, and they begin a very torrid love affair. Now, again, Kim is a very married woman. She's been married for a good long while at this point, and somehow, some way, her and Richard begin a love affair, and they continued this love affair, and for quite a while, it was undiscovered. Until one day, Kim's husband got wise to the situation. Somehow, some way, he was going through Kim's closet, and at the very back of her closet, he finds a box absolutely full to the brim of love letters. Now, these love letters just so happened to be penned by Mr. Richard Gere. Now, he gets wise to the situation, and he begins to watch his wife very, very closely. So the next time she leaves the house, he ends up following her, and he follows her to a restaurant where she then meets up with Richard, and they kiss at the table. And this is how her husband finds out that she's having an affair. It caused a big blow up in the media, and though her and her husband, Kim, and her husband, Ron, did try to work things out and fix the situation, they ended up getting divorced 3 short years later. Her relationship or affair with Richard ended very shortly thereafter, and they all just kind of separated and went their own ways. When it comes to Kim's divorce from her husband, Ron, because she was unfaithful and it was proven, she got absolutely crucified in the divorce. She was ordered to pay $9,000 a month to Ron every single month for 8 years in spousal support. It just goes to show you that cheaters never win. Now we're finally getting in to the point where Richard is getting a little bit older. He is starting to really realize that he wants something with a little bit more permanence. He wants something with a bit more stability. And this is when he really begins to contemplate marriage and really settling down for the first time in his life. And of course, because he's Richard Gere, he's not going to settle down with just anyone. He actually ends up getting married for the first time to the very famous uber supermodel, Miss Cindy Crawford. This is also the first time in Richard's dating life where he is really starting to target much younger women. I don't know if this has anything to do with him trying to hold on to his youth or if he just really likes younger women, but the women he begins to go after from this point on are much, much younger than him. And I'm talking at least 20, 30 years younger than him. So there's a big age gap in all of his relationships moving forward, starting with Miss Cindy Crawford. The year is 1988. He's 39 years old. She is a baby at 22. But she's also very squarely in the middle of a absolutely fantastic career. She is one of the hottest models on the scene right now. Everybody in the world wants her, and somehow, some way, Richard got her. Richard was 17 years older than she was at this point, but they meet, sparks fly, and instant mutual attraction is kind of like in the air. Now, they began dating, and 3 years after they first met, in December of 1991, they eloped to Las Vegas, and they got married. Now, by this time, Richard is 42. Cindy, she is 25, so a little bit older, but still very much a baby. And whereas Richard is very much like an older guy, he's very established, he's pretty much set in his ways, Cindy is still very young. She's been a little bit sheltered, so she's a young 25. And she's still kind of figuring out who she is, what she wants to be, what she wants out of life. And when she met Richard in the first place, she was just kind of flattered that he was interested in her at all. You have this super attractive, very famous older guy who's got everything figured out. He seems suave and he's a gentleman and he's like everything that, you know, little girls dream of, right? So she's very into him. But as their relationship progresses and she continues to grow and grow into the person that she's going to become ultimately, Richard doesn't grow with her because Richard is already who he is. So that age gap really played a very significant role in the dissolution of their marriage, because as Cindy grew, she just realized that though she really did love Richard and enjoyed her time with him, he just wasn't exactly what she was looking for, and she didn't want to be in a relationship where she couldn't grow, because Richard fell in love with her when she was 22 years old. Her 22-year-old self is who he fell in love with. And as she continued to grow and change, she just wasn't that girl that he fell in love with anymore. Now, their divorce was very amicable. There was no, I want this, I want that. There were no fights over money or, division of assets, things like that. They both basically just said, this isn't working for us anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want out. And they both just kind of let each other go and they went their separate ways. I think the ease with which his first marriage kind of dissolved really lured Richard into a false sense of security. So he really went into his second marriage a little bit wild with a little bit of abandon. And it really kind of came back and bit him in the hiney a little bit. He and Cindy ended up divorcing in 1993. They didn't have any children together. They were only married for 3 years. So it was a pretty cut and dry case, and it was over fairly quickly. But after that marriage ended, Richard really realized that he wanted to be a married man. He was kind of over the affairs and the one-night stands. He was done with all of the flings, and what he really wanted to do now was find a woman he could have a nice quiet life with and just kind of like fade into the background a little bit. But of course, he's Richard Gere, so he's got to rebound some way, somehow. His rebound ended up being 22-year-old Laura Bailey. Now, she was a model and a playmate, and their dalliance, their affair, their fling only lasted for about 2 months, and then it was kind of over. He then was cast to play opposite Uma Thurman in Final Analysis, and y'all, Uma Thurman is just the most exquisite, beautiful human being on the planet. She's absolutely stunning. And at this point, I think she's like 24, 25. So she's a baby Uma Thurman and just incredibly freaking gorgeous. And Richard immediately is drawn to her and they begin an affair as well. They end up dating for, I want to say, about a year. However, of course, it wasn't going to last. It wasn't meant to last. Uma did go on to marry someone else and be very, very happy. However, she had nothing but nice things to say about Richard and the time they spent together, though it's never been really confirmed. Again, very, very private. He doesn't really kiss and tell Richard's a gentleman that way. But from what I could gather, they had a really great time together. It was fun while it lasted, and then they just kind of like went and did their own things. Now, I've already said, as Richard got older, he really found that desire to really settle down and build a life with someone, maybe have some children, that it really stuck with him, right? It's something that he is finding is a very big desire. It's the thing that he desires most of all. So he begins hunting for a woman that is really going to make that happen for him. Now, this is when Richard meets actress and former Bond girl Carrie Lowell. Now, she was the Bond girl in the movie License to Kill. They met in 1995, and they began dating very shortly after meeting. Now, again, unfortunately, information about this relationship is very scarce, and the information I do have is very bare bones, but I will share with you what I know. So they met, they began dating, and they dated very seriously for about 7 years. Now, after dating very seriously for about 7 years, Richard finally gets down on one knee and proposes. She, of course, says yes, and they get married in a very small, very intimate ceremony at their home in Pound Ridge, New York, and the only guests in attendance were their children. Now, Carrie had a child from a previous relationship, a daughter named Hannah, and then they also had a child together, a little boy named Homer that they named in honor of Richard's father that was born in 2000. Now, their married life together was pretty low-key, and this is ultimately what caused the failure of their marriage. Like, this is what brought their marriage to an end because, again, Richard is much older at this point. Gere, I think, was at least 20 years younger than Richard at this point, so a pretty big age gap. And while they were both kind of getting up there in years, Gere was still young and wanted to go out. She wanted to socialize. She was very much a social butterfly. And Richard was very content to stay at home and enjoy the peace and the tranquility and the quiet that his estate had to offer. So she's wanting to get up and go out and party and enjoy life. And he's like, no. And he's not allowing her to do so. Like, it would be one thing if she said, okay, just go do your thing. You just got to go by yourself. That's one thing. But he wanted her at home with him and their child. And really just, he kept her on a very short leash, and she got very tired of it. Now, when their relationship came to an end, things got very bitter and very nasty. All in all, they were married for about 12 years and together for 18. So that's a very long time to be with someone. It's a big part of your life to share with someone else. And then, of course, when that just kind of like goes under, there's going to be some bitter emotions. There's going to be some negative intentions there, right? And also, it didn't help that Richard really just did not want to come off of anything in the divorce. I think above all, Richard was just very, very upset that she was done. I think she was tired of getting told what to do. I think she was tired of being stifled and being kind of controlled. And I do think that Richard is quite at fault in this divorce, because it just seems to me like she just wanted to go out and have fun, which of course is her problem as well. She shouldn't have married someone so much older than her if she knew that she wanted to go out and enjoy life and party and have fun. She knew that Richard wasn't into that. So that's her fault as well. They were not compatible anymore. So when it came to the divorce, things got very, very nasty. Richard was not happy about her wanting half of his net worth. Now, at this point, he's got a net worth of about $120 million, which is a good amount. And on top of that, they own quite a few properties together, things like that. Now, in the divorce, Gere, she asked for half of everything. She asked for $100 million, I believe, which was over half of his net worth. And then she also asked for their property. They had a very luxuriously restored Bedford Post Inn. It's kind of like a bed and breakfast, an inn, a historical inn, that kind of thing. So she wanted $100 million and she wanted this property. Now, she said she wanted this property so that she could take it and continue to raise their son. Their son's about 15 at this point. So I'm not sure. But Richard wasn't having it. He was not having it. He was not just going to give her what she asked for, because she basically was trying to clean him out. Again, a lot of bitterness, a lot of pettiness here, and just not good vibes at all whatsoever. Now, they ended up being in mediation for about 4 years. It took 4 years for them to get the financial portion of the divorce kind of settled. However, they did eventually reach a settlement, and Richard was finally done with her. Also, the divorce got so bad that Richard actually went after a photographer with his umbrella at one point. Now, up until this point, Richard is his whole persona, right? The way that he's perceived in the media is this super zen, very kind, very low-key, kind of a distinguished gentleman. And then you've got these divorce proceedings that are driving him absolutely batty. And he's so angry and so just enraged about the entire thing that a photographer comes up to him, starts asking him questions. It's a paparazzi. Comes up to him, starts asking him questions about everything, and Richard just loses it and genuinely chases after this man, brandishing his umbrella like a freaking sword. It's kind of comical when you think about it, but he had to be really, really upset for him to just kind of break his cool or lose his cool like that, because that's the only time in his entire career that anything like that has happened. Following his divorce from Gere, Richard didn't stay single for very long. He had a taste of married life and refused to give that up. He enjoyed being married. He enjoyed the permanence of it. He enjoyed the companionship, and he just didn't want to be alone, right? I completely understand it. Also, at this point, he is much too old to be doing the one-night stand, the fling thing. He wants to be in a relationship. He wants to be married. He wants the permanence. He wants the security. He just wants to have everything locked down and have somebody to grow old with. So he begins looking, because he's not going to stay single. It's not an option. So he's got to find a replacement. And I know that sounds awful, but that's really what the situation is. he begins dating Top Chef television host Miss Padma Lakshmi. I am almost positive I'm not saying her last name correctly, but I'll pop up a picture of her. She's absolutely stunning. Now, they only date for about 6 months before realizing that they're going to be better off as friends. They're not a good fit for each other. So Richard moves on and continues the hunt. After his very short romance with Padma fizzles out in 2014, he then goes on to meet Spanish publicist Alejandra Silva. Now, Alejandra Silva would go on to become wife number 3 and the one that he is currently with. They've been together for a hot minute now, and it seems like their relationship is incredibly successful. Again, the age gap between them is intense. There is a 33-year age gap between Richard and his wife Alejandra. That is the biggest age gap out of all of his relationships, and again, it's very intense. Yet somehow it manages to work for them. They managed to meet somehow at the most perfect point possible. They met when both of them were on holiday, actually. So they were both going through really horrible divorces at the time, and somehow, some way, the stars aligned, and they ended up vacationing at her parents' kind of like in bed and breakfast in Positano, Italy at the same time. Now, they were introduced by a mutual friend, and the very night that they met each other, it was kind of like love at first sight, right? The sparks flew. They couldn't stop making googly eyes at each other, and Richard was very immediately like, this is the one. This is wife number 3 and the rest of my life. Alejandra was not quite as convinced, though. The night they met, they both felt this super intense pull and this kind of connection. However, Alejandra, she is aware that there is a very big age gap between the two of them, and she is, she's unsure if she can make that work. As it's Richard Gere, and he's charming, and he's suave, and he's such a perfect gentleman, but still, that is a very large age gap. She wants children, things like that. How is this going to work? So she tries to keep a little bit of distance between them. She really tries to keep things pretty platonic, but Richard really isn't having it. And of course, he's not pushy, he's not rude or overbearing in any way, but he does woo her, and he definitely has to work to make Alejandra see that he is the one for her. Now, I think for Richard, this is the very first time in his romantic life that he's actually had to work to gain the affection of a woman. For him, women had always come easily. He was Richard Gere. He was a sex symbol. Basically, he was like, he never had to work for it. But with Alejandra, things are very, very different. I feel like the power dynamic is a little bit more even because, he's a little bit past his prime. He is a much older man at this point. She is still very much in her prime. I think Richard was going into his 70s, going into his 60s at this time. And she was only about like 40, going into 40, so very, very young, much younger than him. So he is really having to work to prove himself to her. And work he does. He puts in the work. It is such a sweet and romantic, like, wooing process. He writes her love notes, and he writes her love songs, and he serenades her after they go out to dinner. And he absolutely just floods her with bouquet upon bouquet of sweet smelling red roses. Like, he really puts the work in to really show her that he is very committed, he is very interested, and he is very, very serious. Alejandra eventually caves, and they begin dating very shortly thereafter, and they date for a full 4 years. Now, during these 4 years, life is absolute perfection. They realize that their goals really align. They want the same things. They are very similar people, but different enough for things to still be interesting. Richard, he's learned from his mistakes, especially from his last marriage, but also Alejandra, she's not quite the social butterfly that Carrie was. Their desires are more similar this time. I think the matchup is much better. They're much more similar people, so the relationship just started off on a better foot just in the first place. After 4 years of dating, this is when Richard decides it is now time to propose. It's time to pop the question. So he surprises Alejandra with a surprise getaway for her birthday. He sweeps her off her feet and jets her off to the south of France for a birthday weekend. He ends up getting them a really gorgeous, super romantic hotel. And the night of her birthday, he takes her out to dinner. And after dinner, they kind of go and they dance and they look at the stars and they're enjoying the ambiance, right? He then gets down on one knee and he proposes. She, of course, says yes, and their life together truly begins. Now, the only thing left for Alejandra to do before they actually get married is for her to convert to Buddhism. Now, this is a deal breaker for Mr. Gere. He, we all know, is very good friends with Dalai Lama. Buddhism is a very important part of his life. So Alejandra concedes and she converts to Buddhism, and very shortly after the conversion, they end up getting married. Now, this wedding this time is a little bit bigger than his second marriage. There are some guests there. She has the whole bridal moment. She wears this really gorgeous V-neck lace paneled gown. She has her hair braided down the side of her face. It's just in this like twisty braid. It's absolutely stunning. She looks gorgeous. Richard looks very dapper and debonair, very sophisticated, in just a classic black suit with an open neck, like white button up underneath. He looks very casual, but very sophisticated at the same time. They actually cut quite a beautiful couple together. They ended up announcing that they were pregnant the next year, and they ended up having their son, Alexander. Now, I want to say about 14 months after that, they had baby number 2, a second boy. Now, I could not find the name of the second son. I do know he was born about 14 months after the first. After that, they haven't had any more children. But it seems like their marriage is kind of perfect. It's peaceful. She makes some really sweet posts about Richard over on Instagram. And overall, it just seems like they have a very solid relationship built on mutual respect and trust. Richard keeps his latest marriage very under wraps. He keeps it very, very private. And they really don't speak to the media or the press about their personal life at all. So unfortunately, that is the end of the information I have for you today. So that is the end of the video. I think all in all, Richard has had a really incredible life. He's had one heck of a love life, and I can only assume it's been one very, very wild ride. The overall vibe that I got from him, though, is that he's a pretty nice guy. You would assume maybe that he's a little bit pompous. He could be a little bit full of himself because he was such a very beautiful man and has had so many relationships. Maybe a little bit of a womanizer. But to me, it just really seems like he was just searching for a connection. He was just down for a good time and was very just open to any and every experience. Guys, I love you so, so very much. I hope that you enjoyed today's video as much as I did. This is today's finished look. What do we think? Do we like it? Do we love it? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I love you so, so very much. No filters, no fancy lighting. It is just me sitting in front of my camera telling you guys an epic love story. Hoping you guys are enjoying what I'm doing. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give it a big old thumbs up before you leave. I love you so, so very much. And until next time, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and remember, you're important. Bye.